scared, please leave this room and look later. We will publish the recordings on YouTube. So today we have special guests from Belgium and European Commission. So we will have a first part of our webinar in English, and then we will switch to Czech language. So I think I see that we have nearly 50 participants here. And if I'm not remember wrong, something over 50 was sign up for this webinar. So I hope that we will learn a little more about this very interesting, I think, issue and very hot issue, which we will have to deal in coming months. So it's my big pleasure to introduce you Jan Mailbedo from European Commission, Policy Officer in the European Commission, and also Magali Soenen, Policy Advisor for Higher Education at the Flemish Ministry of Education. And as I see, we have nearly 53 participants. So each of our special guests will have about 30 minutes slot for introducing you, so give you a presentation about micro-credentials from European perspective and from one very interesting results from the project Microbull. We speak about this Magali Soen, and you can ask them questions straightly after their presentation, and you can also use the chat for the questions. So if something you have any idea to ask, you can write these things to the chat. Then we will switch to the Czech language. We have two presentations. One will be mine, and second will be from Markéta Markinková from Charles University, and then we have a panel discussions. So I think we can start. It's not necessary to wait. And I would like to ask Jan if he can start with his presentation. Is it possible?
Yes, it's absolutely possible.
So it's a big pleasure to invite you here, and we are looking forward for your presentation. So floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Nejprve mi prosím omluvte, že dnes mluvím anglicky, protože jsem v Brně žil 2 roky. Moje znalost češtiny není dostatečná na to, abych vám mohl nabídnout zrozumitelnou prezentaci. So after having committed such a crime against your language, I will now turn to English by giving you a short presentation on the recently published proposal from the European Commission for a European approach to microcredentials. So this proposal has both an education and employability perspective that are reflected in the title of the proposal, which is microcredentials for lifelong learning and employability. So why is the European Commission publishing a proposal for European approach to microcredentials? Well, we believe that this is a timely initiative because the digital transition and the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis have heavily impacted the way we live, the way we work, the way we learn. And more than ever, people need and will need through their life to learn new things, to update their knowledge, and to acquire new skills through their life. And microcredentials can be a powerful tool for this. However, what we see is that there are currently barriers to the use of microcredentials and to deliver on their full potential. Why is that? Because the value and the understanding of what a microcredential is, what it represents, what it certifies, is not clear to everyone and sometimes differs from one country to another, from one sector to another, from one system to another. So there is a big misunderstanding. And we believe this is also because there is a lack of standard for the quality, for their transparency. And this is why we came up with this proposal with 3 objectives. The first objective is, as I mentioned earlier, to enable people to acquire the knowledge, the skills, the competencies they need to thrive in this changing society and job market, to also support the providers, such as universities, to be prepared to design and issue micro-credentials that are of good quality, that are with an offer that is transparent and flexible, and to foster inclusiveness and equal opportunities as well, because we want micro-credentials to benefit also to those who are usually outside of the education system. So everyone can benefit from micro-credentials and what they have to offer. Few clarification on the scope of the proposal. The proposal covers, so obviously, micro-credentials and the policies to support their design, their use. Micro-credentials, we believe, can be used to complement, enhance education, training, lifelong learning. But it is very clear also in our proposal that micro-credentials are not here to replace traditional qualifications, traditional degrees. They are here to complement it. They are not here to disrupt the existing systems. They are here to complement it and to improve it, and eventually to make it more accessible to more people. So for this, the proposal establishes a common European approach, building on what already exists out there in terms of micro-credentials. And the approach is composed of different elements with a definition of what a micro-credential is that could be shared across member states, across sectors. Also guidance for the design, for the issuance, for the description of micro-credentials to facilitate their quality, their transparency, their uptake. The proposal is composed as such. We have the so-called building blocks I just mentioned, a common definition, standards element for the description of micro-credentials. So basically a list of pieces of information that a micro-credential should contain in order to be transparent and recognized, and some principles for the design and issuance of micro-credentials. And then in the proposal, we recommend member states to develop an ecosystem that is favorable for the development of the micro-credentials, to, we say, deliver on the potential of micro-credentials, which is really about to use micro-credentials to achieve different types of objectives. And we offer, of course, the European Commission support to do so. So the definition of micro-credentials, you can see, I hope here under your screen in Czech. It was freshly translated. So we talk about here micro-credentials that certify the learning outcomes following a small learning experience. And the definition is the work of, it's the result of a very large consultation exercises we had with experts, with universities, with private providers, with member states. For a year and a half, we led consultations. We are also supported by projects such as the Microbull Erasmus Plus project that you will hear more about after my presentation. And the aim of the definition was to be universal enough so it can be applied to all sectors, all types of providers, but precise enough to cover all the important aspects of a micro-credential we need to agree on, still without hampering the flexibility of micro-credentials, which is, it's a fundamental element of a micro-credential, which is it has to stay flexible in the way it's designed, in the way it's used. It's the main added value of this kind of format of learning. The EU standard elements, they list the pieces of information that a micro-credential should contain. We have mandatory, optional elements. We think that the elements would support the trust in micro-credentials, their understanding, and hence their transparency, their comparability between one micro-credential and the other, and also the portability for the learner of the micro-credential. These elements will be supported by an open standards to be developed by the Commission in consultation with the member states through Europass. But of course, one can think of other possible national systems to do so. When it comes to the guiding principles, we set 10 principles for the design and issuance of micro-credentials. They specify the nature of what a micro-credential is and is made. And they can be used by the member states, by providers, universities as guidance on how to do it. The principles are universal also and can be applied to all sectors. So in there, we talk about the quality of micro-credentials, which implies the quality assurance processes, the transparency of the offer and of the fact that information is available on what micro-credential certifies, the relevance of the micro-credential, the fact that it has been issued after an assessment, the fact that micro-credentials can be included in flexible learning pathways, that they should be recognized, they should be portable, learner-centered, they should have been authenticated, so there is guarantee about the validity, and that information and guidance on how to find the micro-credentials, how to register for it, should be available for the learners. So the proposal is about recommending member states to adopt the definition I presented to you, to adopt the list of standards elements, to adopt the principles I briefly touched upon, and also to develop an ecosystem, a national ecosystem for the development of micro-credentials, use micro-credentials, and of course, implement the recommendation. So when it comes to the ecosystems, of course, first we talk about formal learning settings, and here we recommend member states to support the exploration of micro-credentials by higher education institutions. We think they have a key role to play in widening an attractive learning offer for all types of learners, not only traditional students, to support the exploration of micro-credentials by the vocational and education and training providers, and member states to ensure the availability of public funding for the development of micro-credentials and the programs that lead to them. Of course, respecting the autonomy of universities. We also touch about the non-formal and informal learning settings, where we talk about, we recommend member states to adapt procedures for the recognition of prior learning and validation of non-formal and informal learning to allow for the awarding of micro-credentials in this context. We talk about quality of the micro-credentials, which is an essential condition for the realization of their potential and to support individual success in learning, upskilling, reskilling. So we recommend member states to apply, to adapt, to develop quality assurance mechanisms for micro-credentials issued by the different types of providers, to publish catalogs of micro-credentials so the learning is transparent, it's accessible, and to integrate micro-credentials in national qualification frameworks and systems where it's relevant, taking into consideration national priorities and systems. When it comes to using micro-credentials in the field of education, training and skills policies, we recommend member states to use micro-credentials to improve access to education and training for all learners, including the most disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, to support the transition from post-secondary or vocational education and training to tertiary education, to use micro-credentials to improve basic and more advanced digital skills of people, to support the development of learning provision in environmental sustainability, to enhance or boost the potential impact of, and here we think a lot about universities, the impact of universities on the economy of their cities and regions, to be used for the continuous professional development of teachers, academics, researchers, to transfer latest research findings into quick learning opportunities, and to challenge gender and other discriminatory stereotypes in education and training. Of course, this is not a list of all that can be achieved by micro-credential. There is a lot more, but we decided to give those recommendations as an indication on where we believe micro-credentials can be the most useful and impactful. Of course, the proposal touches also about the labor market policies, and we recommend member states to use micro-credentials to have some labor market impact by giving people the skills they need to find jobs. And we recommend member states as a whole to allocate national resources for the development of micro-credentials, make links where relevant with individual learning accounts, which is another proposal from the Commission, and make the best use of European Union funds and instruments to support the development of this offer. The Commission itself proposes to develop and adapt the European tools that it manages for the adaptation to micro-credential context, to adapt the Europass tool so it can serve the technical implementation of micro-credentials, support cooperation between member states stakeholders, and support more research and data collection on the use of micro-credentials, their development, their benefits, their added value for the learners. And this is briefly about the proposal that the Commission has published. So now what will happen is that now the Council has to discuss this proposal, eventually negotiate it, and hopefully adopt it before it becomes a legal text that has legal value. And the objective is for now to negotiate and adopt this proposal under the French presidency, which has started in January, and that will run until June 2022. So hopefully by mid-2022, this proposal can be officially adopted by the Council and the European Union as a whole. So this will be it for my presentation. I will stop sharing my screen now, and I would like to open the floor to questions if there are any.
Thank you, Jan, for a very interesting presentation. And I think it was a very nice introduction to the topic. If nobody has any questions, which I didn't see anything, I do not see any question in chat. I would like to ask you maybe one thing. What are the next actions which we can looking forward in next weeks or in next months from Commission? I know what happened in Microbull projects, but we can discuss later. But do you know something or some hot news which could be interesting for our audience?
Well, now from the European Commission side, we need to have a mandate from the Council that tell us, go ahead with the micro-credential, we agree with the European approach, and we adopt it. Before that, the only thing we can do is to share information about this proposal to help you to set up working groups or to work together for the development of quality assurance processes for recognition issues, etc. So to foster a bit cooperation between yourself. But we have to wait for the official green light from the Council to take more actions. And I mentioned that we hope that will happen in June this year.
And do you expect any, I don't know, any, Lucy will have a question, but for any like events, webinar, workshops, discussion forum about micro-credentials, if it's anything in plan?
For the moment, not exactly. We are waiting a bit for the first discussion to start, to see where we could actually start with, because there are a lot of issues with micro-credentials, and there is a lot to discuss on. So maybe once we get first indication on what countries would like to work on as a priority, we could start organizing, yes, indeed, workshop, webinar, peer learning activities.
I will give the floor to Lucy Rohikoa. And there is a question from Linda.
Thank you, Mael, for inspiring presentation. About questions, you spoke about Europass in in micro-credential system. Could you talk a little bit more about this? How is the idea of involvement of Europass in this?
Absolutely, Europass could be a good support for the technical implementation of micro-credential, because in the proposal we say that micro-credential should be owned by the learner, so the learner should own the micro-credential and should be able to share it with universities, with employers, or whoever is actually the receiver of this in an online and secure way. And we think that Europass could help there. It could act as a wallet of micro-credentials, for example, that would be both securing the authenticity of the micro-credentials, because it would be, the information would be directly transferred from universities to the Europass platform in the learner's own account, and then he will be allowed and responsible for sharing this data with whoever he deems relevant. So that would be the idea, to have Europass as a central point for collecting micro-credentials. It doesn't mean that they could be only collected in Europass, of course, but that's what we have in mind to further develop it.
Yeah, this was a very good question. I think Linda has similar questions. If there be any platform which will work like Mozilla Backpack for open badges. So I think you answered in some way. And my question would be, if you know if there is already developed some technical standard for Europass, I will be in touch with SKIC Malta, which I know they are also involved in this process, but maybe if you have any information about this topic, because that will be also very interesting for our universities, because they need to develop some kind of repository. And I think we don't have to invent it when it's something already invented. Yeah.
No, indeed, there is some explorative work that is going on right now. At the moment, we are trying to see exactly what technical standards would be needed, what would be needed to be put in place. And yes, of course, the idea is also to share this with the countries, so it can be aligned and the platforms can ideally be interconnected.
Okay, thank you very much. So any other? I see Simon has a question. So Simon, ask, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jan, for the presentation, indeed. I have a tricky one on the funding aspect of it, or like the public funding. If I go directly to the draft council presentation in paragraph 7, you suggest that it's a good thing to provide public funding for micro-credentials, both to higher education institutions and other types of institutions, other providers. And I kind of feel that in the Czech Republic, there is some like cautious political will that we might actually do that. We might like financially support the provision of micro-credentials, but there is a lot of insecurity around this, like, you know, state aid regulation and stuff. Do you have any take on that? Like, would that be okay if we decided to allocate part of the higher education budget on micro-credentials? to provide it only to higher education institutions and not other providers? Or would that be violation of the single market regulations?
Well, no, I don't think so. The thing is, member states are responsible for the organization of education and training. So it's their decision to decide to support higher education the way they want to do it. And if they want to prioritize micro-credential at some point by making some funds available to higher education institutions for the development of micro-credentials, it's the decision of the country. And there is a little we have to say about it. There is the example of Ireland that we used in our staff working document that is accompanying this proposal, where the Irish government made a lot of funding available to universities to develop a large offer of micro-credentials. And this is absolutely fine. You know, even generally, micro-credentials are developed together with the private sector anyway. So in order to have a relevant offer, you would hope that higher education institutions have developed some kind of cooperation with the private sector. So I believe it would benefit to them as well. But I don't think any legal issue to provide more funds to higher education institutions to develop micro-credentials, no.
Great, thank you so much.
It was a very good question. And Lucy has another one. So
another question. You spoke about the higher education area and the vocational training area. And do you think that micro-credentials will be used also for lower level of education system or no?
This is completely up to each country. But what we saw in the research and in the consultation to do this, to make this proposal, was that micro-credentials can be used by at any level and in any format and in any sector, and there is no limitation to higher education, to VET, or to schools, secondary education, even primary school, if we want to be there. There's absolutely no problem for that. It has to be, when member states will integrate micro-credentials in their national qualification frameworks, they will decide at what level they want to have micro-credentials. But there are absolutely no limitation in theory to any level.
Thank you. And we made the discussions about the length of education courses, about, for example, ECTS, and we are not really sure about this, because the recommendation talk about small education, small course, any length. So it's really this the length of education finished by micro-credential is not important.
I'm not sure I got the end of your question.
I think that Lucius, because we had a problem with your connection, you see, that she would like to ask about the length of micro-credentials, because, well, we discuss it because we will like to, we should develop a project focused on micro-credentials. But we guess that in higher education, we would like to limit it, and from at least from one ECTS. We will not say that it's no limitation at all, but maybe we would like to develop some kind of special standard for higher education micro-credentials, some level of 2 or something like that, better quality and these kind of things. So is the question, it should be this, should be any problem, and what kind of be maybe some minimum length of micro-credentials? This is a question because there is not clear answer in the document, in the recommendation. And I know that there was many different kind of proposals. I was also part of the Russia micro-credential special group, and from different kind of projects, there are different kind of recommendations. So if there is anything.
Yes, indeed, you touch upon a tricky question. There was a lot of debate when drafting the proposal if we should refer to short learning opportunities or small learning opportunities. And in the end, we decided to go for small learning opportunities. Why? Because it is true that micro-credentials usually are issued after a short training. But one can very well imagine that you get a micro-credential after having learned something by participating once a month for 1 hour to one training. And in that case, since the total duration, the training was extended over a period of 1 year, that wouldn't really qualify as short because that was a long time to, get it done. So we wanted to be more inclusive to this kind of opportunities, and that's why we went for small. Now we don't define a limit, upper limit or small limit for the duration of the micro-credentials. Why? We just say that higher education institutions should issue ECTS with their micro-credentials. But we don't define a range of ECTS, it's true. We didn't want to go into this because the practices between the member states are very different. In Europe, you have countries that issue micro-credentials with 1, 2 ECTS, and others who go up to 60. So what we mean by small learning opportunity, it's less than a degree. So it's less than a traditional qualification. So it's in most of the case less than 60 ECTS. But then whether it is 5, 2, 10, 15, that's each up to each member state, up to each country, each system to set it up. Even universities, because in the end, these ECTS should be used for the learner to get into a qualification or complete a qualification or to build on with another learning experience. And this is not up to the European Commission to decide what is relevant or not. This is up to each national system.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will have big discussions about if you should use it in ECTS or not. And how, because there is also possibility to just go for some kind of, examination test assessment in the end, and you should just prove it that you have this kind of competencies. And my argument is that if you would like to have some kind of competencies, you need some time to develop some kind of level of competencies. So I think even if there will be no, let's say, no strict definition that no course, because it's possible to just go to this kind of flexibility, because I can learn these things in informal environment or in non-formal courses and just go to university to get it proved that I have this kind of competencies or this kind of level of competencies. We should think that should be at least one ECTS, I guess, probably. I can imagine it's maybe in some area, non-university or tertiary education area, it could be maybe smaller, but from my perspective, it means this should be very, I think, beneficial if we start with at least one ECTS as a borderline for higher education sectors, because today we have also for lifelong learning some shorter courses, of course, but I think this should not lead to micro-credentials itself, probably, or some level higher. What do you think?
No, yes, indeed. I mean, one ECTS sounds like a reasonable minimum for the award of ECTS. Mm-hmm. And actually, I don't think we have examples in Europe of countries that already award ECTS with their micro-credentials that are below this. Yeah. It's the usual minimum is that we could see was 2, 3 ECTS even.
Mm-hmm. I know there's an example maybe from Australia also, etc. You speak of nano credentials. Hey, Magali, nicely said. That's good point. It's still we discussing about the terminology and this kind of thing is still not, let's say, set up. It's still flowing. So this is very interesting. And yeah, she spoke about digital badges, which is an also interesting concept, which I said was inspiration for micro-credentials. Well, anyway, thank you very much for this very important input. And we would like to also invite you, Center for Education Studies and West Bohemian University, in name of me and Lucy, to our conference, which is called DISCO. And the topic will be empowering entrepreneurial and digital competencies through e-learning, but I think we can discuss it about micro-credentials. So I hope we will be in touch. The conference will be 20 and 21st June in Prague. So I think, and we will have also some topics of virtual reality. So I think you can, if you have time, you can make set up, look to your diary, and we will be in touch, and we will try to invite you. Also, Magali will do later. So thank you very much, Jan. You still have an opportunity to ask Jan in the chat if you would like to. If there be any questions, we can ask after Magali presentations later. So I would like to welcome Magali Sanan. She is a higher education policy officer at Flemish University, Ministry for Education, and she will present us the results of very interesting project Microbull, and I expect that she will also welcome us, or she will invite us to their final conference, I hope. So Magali, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for this nice introduction. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Absolutely.
Well, I cannot impress all of you like Jan Mael did in Czech. I'm sorry about that. I will keep to English, but I hope the Microbull project might impress you instead. So thank you very much for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to present what we have done so far in Microbull. First, let me start by giving you some details about this project. In Microbull, we investigate the link between micro-credentials and the Bologna key commitments. So for those of you who are not so familiar in the Bologna setting, so the Bologna key commitments, there are three. So the first one is quality assurance, the second one, recognition, and the third one, qualification frameworks and ECTS. So especially around these topics, we have done some work on micro-credentials. The project is supported by Erasmus+. It's a policy support project to support the implementation of the European higher education area. And it's coming almost to its end. It has been running since March 2020, and it will finish now in March 22. The partners in the project, so the project is coordinated by the Flemish Ministry of Education and Training. But of course, we're not doing this on our own. We have our very valuable partners, the Ministry of Education and Culture of Finland, CIMEA, the Enigmatic Center of Italy, European University Association, and ENQA. Next to our project partners, we also have a number of experts on the topic. Anthony Camilleri, Frederik de Decker, Catherine Isaacs, George Ubachs, and Peter van der Heijden, who have given a lot of support and input throughout the project. Now, what was really our aim of this project? Well, we applied for this project already in 2019, yes, 19. And at that moment, the topic of micro-credentials was not as hot as it is right now. So one of the first aims of our project was really to raise awareness among national governments and to encourage them to put this topic on their policy agenda. Furthermore, we also wanted to check whether the existing tools that we know from the Bologna process, whether they are fit for micro-credentials or if they need some kind of adaptations to be used or to be usable for micro-credentials. Furthermore, we also wanted to formulate some recommendations and create a kind of European framework for micro-credentials. So I think what is important here is that we are working with Microbull in the European higher education area. We just heard the the story and the processes that are going on within the EU. So we have a bit broader perspective. We work with all the countries in the European higher education area within our project. The structure and the timeline of the project. So we started off with a desk research on microcredentials that was initiated in April and finished in August 2020. Then we launched our project to all the stakeholders, let's say, through a kickoff conference. And after this kickoff conference, we also started working groups, 3 working groups on these 3 Bologna key commitments that I mentioned. So as you see, these working groups have been active since September 2020 until May 21. And we had quite a lot of participants in each of those working groups. As of course, we had not foreseen that when writing the application, but then came COVID and we were forced to have all this work done online. So we decided to have an extra survey among EHEA countries because it was rather difficult with those big working groups to really get input from all countries within the EHEA during those meetings. If you have a physical meeting, it takes longer, you have more time to network, to gather information from different countries. So we tried to solve this problem by having an overall survey among the EHEA countries. Last winter, we did the survey, and I will give you some outcomes of the survey results later on in this presentation. After we had these outcomes of the survey, we started more intense work within the working groups. We had several meetings, in-depth meetings on these 3 topics in spring 21. And out of these meetings and the desk research and the results of the survey, we gathered recommendations on the 3 Bologna key commitments. So these were published beginning of July 21. Since then, the working groups are not active anymore, but we as a project consortium have been working in autumn on this European framework for microcredentials, and that will be presented as well during our final conference, which is foreseen on the 8th of March. And in between, of course, we also had the recommendations of the European Commission that you just heard coming out in December. So that's also something important to mention, that we, throughout our project, we have been trying to look for as much cooperation and synergies between the work in the EU and in the EHEA. And that, I think that's very important. We started our work with a working definition that we proposed at the kickoff conference, in which we say that a microcredential is a small volume of learning certified by a credential. And in fact, this first sentence is more or less our definition. What comes after that is more an explanation. It's saying in which context it can be used, how it can be recognized, what the purpose of a microcredential could be. So I will not go into detail here with you. We've already heard in the meantime also the definition of the Commission. What is important is because during our project we had a lot of time the question, what's the difference in the different definitions, etc. But in fact, we don't think that our definition or the definition of the Commission or of other international organizations that might have other definitions, we don't think that there's a lot of problems with these different definitions. Ours is just more focused on higher education, whereas the one of the European Commission is more broad and covers all levels of education. So if you look at our definition, we speak about ECTS credits, we speak about the qualification framework EHEA. It's more using the terminology of higher education, but we don't really see a real problem that definitions would not cover the same things, let's say. For us, this small volume of learning was rather important. So we are happy from the side of the project that the Commission in the end also followed this terminology, because we think that it's not about a period of time. It's really about a volume of competences that that a student acquires. So it's about a small volume of learning outcomes. So that is really what we thought was important here in this definition. We also don't, to answer the question that was asked before, we also did not put a certain number of ECTS to a micro-credential. But it has also been discussed in our working groups, but what we also consider is a minimum of 1 and a maximum of less than a full degree, so less than 60 ECTS. So now I will take you through some outcomes of our Microbull survey. So as I already explained, the aim of the survey was really to gain a broad picture of the state of play on micro-credentials within the European higher education area. Target group, so we asked, we sent our survey to the members of the Bologna follow-up group and also to all the nominated representatives of the countries in our working group. So it was a joint effort of all those people filling out the surveys. And we had a participation of 35 countries in the end. We had 3 sections in our survey, and the first one was really on the use of micro-credentials. Overview of micro-credentials offered or being developed, the regulation of micro-credentials, etc. Of course, I must say that the data of this survey is of about 1 year ago. So as this is a very hot topic, it might be that the results would be already a little bit different when we would do the survey again as of today. Now, if we have a look at the countries that offer or are developing micro-credentials, we see that at that time, January, more or less 21, in 21 countries, there were already micro-credentials on offer. And 3 countries answered that they were being developed. 8 countries not offered or not being developed at that moment. If we then have a look of what are these micro-credentials in the countries that say that they already have them, well, we see that it's a very diverse picture. It can be modules or course units parts that are part of degree programs. It can be MOOCs, it can be programs in postgraduate education, it can be specialized courses. So it's really a very broad picture that we gained. We did not really guide the countries in what they should consider as a micro-credential. We just offered them this working definition and said, you can take up everything in the survey that falls under this definition, whether it is called a micro-credential or not in your country. Just every kind of learning experience that could fall under the definition. If we ask the countries about official records or registers, we see that most of them do not have a register of micro-credentials on offer, nor of providers. But some countries did mention that they had some registers of providers, 9 countries, or a register of accredited micro-credentials on offer only in 7 countries. If we then have a look at the regulation of micro-credentials, we see in 14 countries that micro-credentials are allowed to be organized, but that there are no specific regulations or no specific regulations yet in those countries. In 8 countries, they are allowed and there are specific regulations. And then we have a number of countries where they say, no, it's still under discussions, or even one country saying that my institutions should not offer micro-credentials. Maybe they changed their mind in the meantime. I don't know. If we look at the link between micro-credentials and digitalization policies, 21 countries answered that they don't have such a policy. 7 countries said yes, we do have a digitalization policy, but microcredentials are not part of it yet. And in 5 countries, microcredentials are also part of the digitalization strategy at national level. Then if we have a look at the second section of our survey, we have a closer look at the 3 Bologna key commitments. So we start with quality assurance, and we asked if microcredentials are included in the national QA system and in the national QA procedures. And we see that in most countries, they are not referred to, sometimes not explicitly, but they might implicitly fall under the same QA system. Only in 2 countries, they were explicitly mentioned already in the QA system at national level. If we asked about the sources of information on the quality assurance status of awarded credentials, mostly this can be done through the provider, so through the higher education institutions. Only in 8 countries through a register of accredited microcredentials, and in some other countries there was not information yet really on the QA status of awarded microcredentials. Then we looked at the recognition. What is the main purpose to recognize microcredentials? Well, there is a clear top 3. First one is to increase the learner's competitiveness in the labor market. Then there's on the second place also the academic purposes, so for further studies, or to recognize credits or prior learning. So these are the main purposes for recognition of microcredentials. Next to that, we also have the easier access to higher education, or some countries say that they do not really recognize yet microcredentials in their country. Furthermore, on the recognition issue, in 18 countries, they say no, only microcredentials from higher education institutions are recognized, not from other providers. And in 16 countries, also microcredentials from other providers are recognized. So that's a more or less balanced picture that we got about non-HE providers. Then if we go and have a look finally to the qualification frameworks, we ask the countries if their framework is open to microcredentials. And there we get a very diverse image. Most of the countries say no, it's not yet open, or at least microcredentials are not yet mentioned in the qualification system. And then a number of countries says, yes, it is open to microcredentials, but then still the more detailed answers vary a lot. Some say, yes, they can be included at any level. In some other countries, it's linked to certain levels, etc. So it's a quite diverse picture what concerns national qualification frameworks. And if we have a look at ECTS, it's more or less the same. It's in most of the countries say yes, microcredentials are in some cases expressed in ECTS. In some countries, always expressed in ECTS. But these both categories, within those 2 categories, also the detailed picture that we got was very, very diverse. Which also led to the fact that we also did not define a number or a range of ECTS in the end. Because by setting a range of ECTS for a microcredential, it could also result in having some kind of microcredentials left out. And that's also something that we didn't want to happen. So we wanted to be as inclusive as possible and cover all kinds of microcredentials. also a bit linked to the number of ECTS and the volume of a micro-credential is the stackability. So whether several small micro-credentials can be stacked to a larger program, to a micro degree, or even to a full degree program. In almost half of the countries, they answered that it's not stackable yet. In the other half of the countries, they say yes, it is stackable to a larger degree or a larger unit. And if we, in the end, also asked about the type of support that countries still need, it's really about peer support, exchange of good practices, webinars, training materials, to learn from each other among the different countries in the European higher education area. The last section in our survey was about the challenges regarding the application of the Bologna tools to micro-credentials. And if we asked that to the countries at that time, they almost all said that it's the applicability of the tools to micro-credentials that is still a challenge. So that also relates to the need for peer support, the need for exchange of good practices, etc., to learn from each other, to get guidelines, all these kind of things. Now, as mentioned before, based on the results of the survey, we also published a set of recommendations. So all these documents that I mentioned, the survey results, the recommendations, the desk research, desk research, it's all available on our website. So if you want to have a closer look at it, you can find everything on the website. So it's the recommendations, it's a joint publication of the outcomes of the 3 working groups, and that resulted in 34 recommendations on quality assurance recognition and qualification frameworks. I will not go through all of them. I'll just give you a brief overview. So the first part of the recommendations is really on some transversal themes about the fact that micro-credentials are an opportunity to rethink higher education's role in lifelong learning, about the common agreement, the common format, the legislation, and the link to digitalization. The second part is on peer exchange and support, and also the necessity of involving all actors while developing and making regulation, etc., for micro-credentials. And if we have a look at the key commitments, there are also 3 sets of recommendations on each of the key commitments. For quality assurance, there is the link with internal and external quality assurance. For example, we recommend that all micro-credentials should be subject to internal QA, independently of the external QA approach. But there are some other recommendations as well. We speak about learner involvement in QA. For example, one of the recommendations say that it's important to include the learners in all steps of the development and implementation of micro-credentials, because that might be more difficult than involving students throughout a full degree program, because the students of micro-credentials can sometimes be only a very limited time at your higher education institution. The third one is the transparency of information, in which we say that, for example, higher education institutions should provide information about the quality assurance mechanisms that they use for their micro-credentials. And the fourth topic is about register and catalogs of providers of, and micro-credentials, for example, to ensure the inclusion of micro-credential providers in DECAR, the database on external, the database of the External Quality Assurance Register. If we look at recognition, we also have 2 blocks of recommendations. One, the link with the Lisbon Recognition Convention, and one on the recognition of prior learning. I also mentioned here a few examples. For example, the first one, to make explicit to what extent micro-credentials can fall within the scope of the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And for example, another one is the use, to use validation of learning outcomes from non-formal and informal learning only in cases where a formal micro-credential is absent. then if we go to the qualification frameworks at ECTS, it speaks for itself. We have several blocks on qualification framework and on ECTS. I see that the number 2 is there on an incorrect place. I will correct that later. So what is important there is that the European discussion and national solutions should be taken forward simultaneously. And micro-credentials should be included in the national qualification frameworks when possible. On the other hand, regarding ECTS, we say that we need to ensure that the existing ECTS users guide is well known and correctly followed by the higher education institutions and its elements clarified for other stakeholders. Next to these survey results and the recommendations, we are also working at this moment to develop some kind of framework for micro-credentials in the European higher education area. And this is something that we would like to present during our final conference, which is planned on the 8th of March. So I would already like to share this save the date with you. So it will be organized online, and of course everyone is very welcome to join us there. And if you want more information about the Microbull project, you can visit our website, or if you have more direct questions, you can also contact us at our project email address. So this was it from my side. I hope it was interesting for you, and I'm ready to take any questions if you might have some. Thanks.
Thank you, Magali, for a very interesting presentation. I think it was very interesting. I would have maybe 2 questions. One question was, if I'm not wrong, that when I read your materials, that the recommendation, the scale or the range was from 3 to 15 ECTS credit, if I'm not wrong, in your projects.
No, not really.
Not?
No. It might be mentioned somewhere because it has been discussed quite a number of times throughout the project. It might be mentioned that most of the micro-credentials would fall between 3 and 15. Mm-hmm. But that's also, an estimation, of course, because we don't have the information on all micro-credentials in all EHEA countries. So that could be, but we didn't set a range.
Okay, I assume the most was the most common practice. And the second question is about Credify. How is the state of art of the development of Credify, the repository for micro-credentials, which was connected to your project?
Well, this is not something that we really investigated through our project. I must say there is a link, or there was a link on our website, yes. But it was mainly linked to the previous project because we have a joint website with also a previous project. Because one of our experts, Anthony Camilleri, was project coordinator of this previous project that ended, I think, almost a year ago now. And that was something that was linked to his project. But we wanted to keep the outcomes of the 2 projects together on one website. So we didn't really investigate anything in our project on Credify.
Yeah, I cannot find it, so I was my question, and I had no time to ask Anthony, so I was a bit confused about these things. So thank you for giving clear information about it. Okay, I'm looking if anybody has any questions, and I see Teresa would like to ask, so I give her floor.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Magali, for your presentation. And just one question connect with quality assurance of micro-credentials. Is there any specific standards and guidelines to the micro-credentials, or you can use the ESG standards as well as in program, in study programs?
Yes. Thank you for this question. Yes, we investigated this because this was, for example, one of the key things that we wanted to investigate in our project. How are the current Bologna tools usable for micro-credentials? And especially for the ESG, we came to the conclusions that they should not really be adapted at this moment, but that they can be used also for micro-credentials. The only thing that we also put in our recommendations and that we will work on in the coming years is that we said it might be necessary to produce some guidelines on how to use them for micro-credentials. We don't really need to change them as such, but we should maybe give some guidelines to higher education institutions on the one hand, and guidelines to quality assurance agencies on the other hand, on how to use them in the case of micro-credentials. And this is also something that we will take up further within the Bologna follow-up group. So as you might know, in the Bologna process, we have 3 thematic peer groups on each of the Bologna key commitments. So these thematic peer groups have been recomposed after the Rome conference, ministerial conference, and they are setting up their work programs for the period 21-24 now. And in all 3 of those thematic peer groups, micro-credentials is one of the topics on the agenda. So in that sense, our working groups that we had, or that we still have within the Microbull project, will have some kind of continuation through the Bologna thematic peer groups. And also for these peer groups, we have applied for new Erasmus Plus projects to support the work in the peer groups, and also in the 3 umbrella projects on the 3 Bologna key commitments, there is a part on micro-credentials in these project applications. But we are still waiting for the results of the European Commission that would come now in February, I hope. And then we will know what we can take up exactly within the 3 years ahead of us. But for sure, for quality assurance, those guidelines are also on the program. We will work on that and develop those in the coming period.
Oh, okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, Magali and Jan, also audience for the questions. I would like to wish you good luck and finger crossed for your projects, Magali. So I hope that you will be the Commission and our team committee will choose your projects, and you can continue in this very important job. And now we will switch to Czech. So I'm sorry that we will start speak Czech, and we will go to the second part of our webinar. And if there is any question, I didn't see any questions. If you have any other questions, you can send us an email, and we will forward these questions to Jan or to Magali. So because I know sometimes you need some time to digest the information, etc. So we will continue. So have a nice day. Thank you very much that you come here, and we keep in touch.